1906. It's a time where Theodore Roosevelt was president. The San Francisco earthquake was the worst in U.S. history with a 9 on the Richter scale. Typhoid Mary was finally found as a carrier of typhoid after 8 years. Henry Ford organized the Ford Motor Company. And G.W. Maxwell introduces the milk carton. Also, the Stanley steamer, designed with the help of a wind tunnel, breaks 127 miles per hour, but blows up while racing, reinforcing public fears of steamers. All of these mileposts of 1906 can be sourced from local.aaca.org. Speaking of things blowing up or catching fire, here's one from Stanley, Wisconsin. But first, here's a brief background from Stanley that can be sourced to stanleywisconsin.us. In 1880, the Wisconsin Central Railroad had arrived, causing the area to be surveyed and mapped in August of the following year. In May of 1895, Stanley received village status. Almost 3 years later, the city of Stanley was declared on March 17th of 1898. Chapman Lake, just north of the railroad, housed the foundation needed to start the Northwest Lumber Company, which once stood where Foundry Park now is. After the forested area became less forest, farming started to rise. But since the 1970s, farming has lessened, and today, Stanley serves as a corridor city on Highway 29. Friday, May 18th, 1906. It was like any other day around 2 p.m., according to Our Story, Volume 5, JunDisasters.com, and the Stanley Area Historical Society. The men and women were shopping up and down Broadway, and the men were working, but it was a little more breezy than normal. According to Betty Plombon, the refuse burner, where the Stanley fires started, was a huge burner or furnace, 80 feet high, made of fire brick and iron, and used to burn sawdust, bark, and other refuse thrown out by the mill. Sparks were then carried eastward across the pasture to the warehouse and store. The flames had spread to dozens of buildings eastward from the company store. The local fire department prevented the fire from heading south toward the business district, but it still headed to the east where many of the townspeople resided. The firemen were Peter Bransness, Rodney Lytle, Charles Lamphere, Louis Menswell, and Fred Goddard. 2 miles out in the country, a straw stack caught fire from a burning ember that flew from Stanley. Within the city limits, houses mysteriously caught fire, although they were as far as 3 blocks from the scene of any other blaze. The water tower in the middle of the city was charred, but was still standing along with the public library and the school. The school was out of danger because the male students put wet towels around the building. In this high-stress day, many people buried their valuables like this long-action .45-70 caliber rifle found in 1976. The firemen kept an eye on the smoldering ruins throughout the night to make sure another fire would not erupt. The L.I. Row home on Franklin Street caught fire 4 or 5 times, but was squelched by Ed and his brother Ludwig. Ed and Lud had spent the hours of the big fire on the west roof of the house, watching for flying, flaming shingles or other wind-borne pieces of wood. We saw the spire of our church blazing and heard the bell crash to the ground. Today, you can drive the path of the fire and never tell a fire had once engulfed the area. To the right, you can see the public library, which is still standing. They have remodeled a little bit on the inside. Here's the L.I. Row home. Family still lives there, and the old phone cannot be removed from one of the walls. A pharmacy stands where the water tower used to be, and there's an open field where the high school once stood. The lot is now for sale. The city of Stanley has moved on from the fire, and it is barely mentioned anymore.